Oikos living with KONOS. I'm now going to have to start, presuming you don't yet have your KONOS manual and you're not sure which one to get and you're not clear about it all. So I'm going to get that out the way. There are 3 KONOS volumes. This is for junior years, meaning any child from toddler upwards, all the way up to young adult years, around about 14, 15 years of age. That's your age bracket this is covering. It's also covering all your social studies subjects. And it is integrating all your age children. So whether you've got 1 child or 6 children or more, no matter what their ages are, between this age bracket from little babies all the way through to 15 is what these 3 KONOS volumes are covering in the way of social study subjects. So I know your reference might be, but what about history and geography and science and all those different separate subjects that maybe you're used to from your reference that's in your mind, but that is now all integrated into KONOS living, which we're going to be going into the detail of that a little later on. But for now, how to choose which one? Because there are 1, 2, 3, which is the yellow one is number 1 because it was written first. Then they exhausted that. You can't just keep on writing because there wasn't space to fill for a manual. You had to stop after a certain number of pages, and so they continued to volume 2 and then volume 3. And they were colored yellow, green, and red. So how to assess which one of those you need, if I'm saying you don't have to go in a number order, the way to assess which volume is right for you is to understand the character traits in each volume, which I'll go through for you. Volume 1's character traits are attentiveness, obedience, orderliness, trust, patience, stewardship, and honor. And then Volume 2, the green volume, inquisitiveness, responsibility, love and generosity, courage, wisdom, loyalty. And then the last one, cooperation, determination, honesty, self-control, initiative and resourcefulness, and joy and cheerfulness. So you look at all those character traits, they're covered across all 3, and you decide, which one does our family need? Well, that's going to be dependent on where your family's at, where your children are at, the ages of your children, your living circumstances at the time. But Volume 1 was written in consideration of little ones because that's where they started. Okay, so for example, you have to teach a child to be attentive before you can teach him to be obedient. So that's going to come before you start teaching them about trust and honor, because a 6-year-old is not going to be understanding the character trait of trust and honor. And you as a parent aren't going to be focusing on teaching your child about trust and honor when they're 6. You're going to rather be focusing on developing the character trait of attentiveness or obedience. So then clearly you would start with Volume 1 just because that is appropriate for the younger children. However, if you've brought your children out of school and they are now 14 and 12 and 10 and you want to get a KONOS lifestyle going in your home, then it might be more appropriate depending on what your family is doing. If your family is going on a trip somewhere and perhaps you're flying and your children are afraid for whatever reason, so then you would look through the various 3 volumes and see where trust is, and that's the one you'd get. It happens to be in Volume 1. Another example would be responsibility. Let's say you're getting a new pet in the family and you want them to learn about responsibility, being responsible themselves rather than the parents taking on all the responsibility. Responsibility is one of the units in one of the volumes, being Volume 3. So then you would select that because there's a whole lot in there about pet care. So that is how you establish which one of these volumes it is that you need and which is going to be right and appropriate for your family. I've hoped you gathered by now with Oikos that we don't presume that we know what's right for your family. We're not going to say you must start with Volume 1 because that's the place to start. We're rather saying to you, assess where you need and what is right for your family. If you haven't already watched the Taking the Steps, Step 1, 2, and 3, about assessing your children and how to assess them and so on and so forth, that is where I would suggest you also go visit and get a bigger understanding and a better understanding of why we're encouraging parents to make the assessments that are right for their very unique and special, specific circumstances for their own families. Okay, so there you have Volumes 1, 2, and 3. Now, some parents ask me, but now, if I get Volume 1, when will I need Volume 2? And I say to them, well, if you were going to do all the activities in this volume, it's going to take you 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, to try and do all the activities here. And you're only going to do the activities that are appropriate for the age your children are at the time when you have this manual. And then you find, oh, we've done 3 of the characteristics in here, character traits, and now we need to do this responsibility one because there's a pet coming into the home. And so now then you go and get the red volume. And you order that and you get that and you go to responsibility. Now you finish responsibility and there's something back here in the yellow volume, trust, as I was referring to earlier. And so you come back to here and you continue with trust. So some families are choosing to get all 3 at one time, so they've got all these different character traits that they can work with and pick and choose. Others, depending on budget, but depending on whether they want to make the commitment to all 3, maybe you're going to get your KONOS volume and see if it's going to be good for your family. And so they would get that and work with it for a while. How long to spend on each one, how much time to spend on each character trait, that we're going to go into more detail of in these workshops. For now, I just wanted to help you to know how to make the right choice. And before I go off that, let me just mention the timelines, because this also brings a little bit of confusion to some. You have got timelines for each volume. The timelines are actually the characters that you cut out, the children cut out these little figurines, and they put them onto the timeline wall. Now, in your KONOS volume, it explains how to do that at the very beginning. So if a person is buying for the first time KONOS volume, they would, for example, choose the yellow one. They would get the yellow timeline characters to accompany it. But now you need the strips, which we call century lines, to go up on the wall. You buy the century lines once. You put them on your wall, BC and AD, and then you will start building your timeline by cutting out the characters that are relevant to the character trait unit you're busy with, and they will go onto the timeline. An example of if you're doing attentiveness, seeing as we're talking about volume 1, the yellow volume, and you're doing attentiveness and you're studying Samuel because he was attentive to the Lord, and you'll cut out Samuel and you'll put it onto the timeline. And then you'll be studying Alexander Graham Bell, for example, and you will cut him out and put on the timeline. And very soon the children and the parents get excited about this. You start to see a big picture of history happening. It's not just facts and figures and names and dates to be memorized. It actually is on the wall and you actually see blocks of history, and it all starts to build this big picture of history in blocks and from BC to AD and so on. So I will show you examples of the timeline also in this workshop, but that's just for you to understand about what to get. Century lines first off, never again, and thereafter you just get the characters that go with the volume. Okay, so that's your timeline characters. I hope this has made it clear as to how to go about choosing which volume. If you've already got one of these volumes, I'm sure you're keen just to get on to know how to put it to its greatest value, which is what we will begin with next.